When the lights are out, the mysterious ghost fears the light, but moves with lightning speed in the dark and poses a deadly danger at the slightest mistake. The story begins after an evening shift. A worker in a factory stayed up late and was getting ready to go home as usual. But just as the woman was about to leave, she noticed something strange. Even though there was no one in the control room, every time she switched off the lights, a black shadow appeared in the corner. At first, the woman believed she was seeing things. She turned off the main switch and prepared to depart. But a dark shadow reappeared in the corner. The scary picture surprised her, and she was too terrified to turn out the lights. She turned around to find her employer, Paul, who was still working in the office. However, Paul was preoccupied with his task and did not hear the worker's warning. He assumed the workers had come to hand over to him and waved her away. When the manager waved, the employee believed Paul knew and hurriedly left the company. Soon later, Paul hung up the phone. Noticing that it was already early in the morning, he took the reports from the box and prepared to go. However, when Paul passed the warehouse, he noticed an unusual dark shadow in the darkness. He felt there was still someone working overtime. Paul was strolling when the warehouse lights went out. Paul yelled, and the voice-activated lights turned back on. However, as he turned back to check, he noticed that the dark shadow had moved forward slightly. But Paul still couldn't see who the black shadow was, and he really wanted to go ahead and check. But the black shadow vanished again. Paul felt uneasy as he looked down the empty corridor. He turned to leave, but suddenly felt something tug on him. Looking down, he noticed his ankle had been scratched. Before Paul could react, a dark shadow reappeared. This time, Paul could clearly see that the shadow was not human. The shadow tried to approach, but got burned by the light. Looking at the light bulb above, Paul understood the shadow was terrified of light. He ran back into his office and turned on all the lights. But as Paul was considering how to escape, the office lights began to flicker. Unlucky Paul died horribly in the factory corridor. However, the strange incidents did not end there. Martin, Paul's son, had been having nightmares since his strange death. Martin, in his half-awake condition, overheard his mother Sophie arguing with someone. When Martin reached the door, he found Sophie alone, yet she continued talking to herself. He thought whether his mother was struggling to accept his father's death. However, just as he was about to retreat to his room, he spotted a chilling sight, a mysterious shadow that sent a shiver down his spine. Although his mother seemed completely oblivious to it, Martin, filled with panic, quickly rushed back to his room. Fearful, he left the lights on all night. Fortunately, the shadow did not come back. Exhausted from lack of sleep, Martin accidentally dozed off during class the next day. The teacher, thinking Martin was emotionally overwhelmed by his father's death, attempted to reach out to Sophie, but her phone was out of service. Unable to get in touch with her, the teacher reached out to Martin's half-sister, Rebecca. When she received the call, Rebecca and her boyfriend, Brett, hurried to the school. Martin informed Rebecca about the unusual events happening at home. It became clear that Sophie had been struggling with depression for a long time and frequently talked to herself. Her condition was managed with medication. Rebecca believed their mother was deeply affected by Paul's death. She decided to have Martin stay with her for a few days until Sophie felt better. However, Martin was unaware that the shadow had followed him to Rebecca's home. Late at night, while Rebecca was asleep, she faintly heard a weird noise. She glanced upward and noticed a shadow at the door. Thinking it was Martin, she switched on the light to see. But as soon as the light came on the room, the shadow mysteriously disappeared. Just then, the bedside lamp flickered and went dark. Terrified by the sudden disappearance of the shadow yet again, Rebecca hurriedly turned on the overhead lights. After thoroughly searching the room, she found no sign of the shadow at all. Could it have been a dream? Concerned, she made her way to Martin's room and found him fast asleep, a flashlight clutched in his hand. As Rebecca wondered this, she noticed a scratch on the floor. She remembered the earlier incident when the shadow appeared to be doing something at that location. When she lifted the rug, Rebecca discovered that the scratch on the floor was actually a name. Spotting the name made her recall a childhood memory. Rebecca had drawn a family portrait that summer. She heard a sound from behind her as she was about to finish. She turned and saw nothing. However, when she looked back, the drawing had vanished. As she wondered what had happened, the noise returned. Checking the sound, she discovered the lost drawing in the wardrobe. She was shocked to see that the drawing now had a second person named Diana next to it. The drawing's name corresponded with the mark on the ground. Is Diana the shadow? Rebecca and Brett went to Sophie's house to find out. Unfortunately, she was not there. While searching, Rebecca discovered a medical file in a cabinet. The file disclosed Diana's identity and history. Due to her extreme depression, Sophie was admitted to a mental hospital for therapy. There, she met Diana, who suffered from a rare skin disease that, in the presence of sunshine, suffered from a rare skin condition that resulted in severe burns when exposed to sunlight. However, Diana passed away due to complications. After 2.5 years of treatment, Sophie finally recovered and was discharged from the hospital. Meanwhile, Rebecca discovered an old family portrait tucked away in a cabinet. Although the writing had faded over time, Diana's name remained clear. Just as Rebecca contemplated this mystery, the door to the room suddenly locked. Before she could respond, Diana appeared again. Just as Rebecca felt she was about to lose consciousness, Brett opened the door. The moment light flooded in, Diana disappeared. When Sophie got home, a scared Rebecca showed her the photo and questioned, worried that she had upset Diana while in the hospital. Sophie then explained that Diana was actually alive. Noticing her mother's distress, Rebecca understood that Sophie's condition was worsening. She quickly reassured Sophie, who soon calmed down. Concerned about Diana's possible return, Rebecca chose to spend the night, and she bought many light bulbs. Afterward, she apologized to Sophie for her previous behavior. Once she felt more at ease, Sophie forgave her daughter, and they shared a hug. Sophie secretly handed a note to Rebecca. Before Rebecca could say anything, Sophie headed back to her room. As Sophie closed the door, Rebecca felt something dragging her. She saw that note. Rebecca noticed it was a plea for help from her mother. And she began searching for her mother's medication. However, after searching the entire house, she came up empty-handed. Rebecca decided to go out and buy some, but soon realized it was too late, and all the pharmacies were closed. As she tried to figure out her next move, the lights in the room suddenly went out. Initially, she thought Diana might have turned off the switch, but it remained on. Panicking, Rebecca hurried to the basement, but everything with the electrical system appeared fine. It dawned on her that Diana had blacked out the entire street to shut off the lights. Meanwhile, Martin, alone in his room, was also being targeted by Diana. He had a candle, but the light from it was too weak. Diana was fortunate to be unable to get any closer to Martin as he moved. Martin found Rebecca in the basement, but Diana locked them up. Brett came to the door after hearing the commotion but was unable to open it. Diana suddenly appeared behind Brett. Brett used his phone in panic, and Diana was scared away by the light on the screen. But as Brett stood up, Diana appeared and knocked the phone away. Brett ran out of the living room, terrified. Diana remained hidden in the dim moonlight, but just as Brett thought he was safe, she appeared from the shadows. Fortunately, Brett reached for his car keys just in time. He almost fled by using the car's light. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Martin, locked in the basement, were in danger. Fortunately, Martin quickly activated a flashlight, which successfully frightened Diana away. Just then, they heard police sirens outside. Brett had alerted them, and officers had arrived. Brett recounted the situation to the police, but they seemed doubtful. One officer entered the house and discovered Rebecca and Martin in the basement. Just as Rebecca believed they were finally safe, Diana showed up and kicked the officer away. Hearing gunshots, the female officer and Rebecca hurried to the living room. That Diana had already killed the first officer, and sadly, the female officer soon met the same fate. Witnessing the horrific deaths of the officers, Rebecca and Martin panicked and attempted to escape. Diana returned, seized Rebecca, and hurled her from the second floor. Fortunately, Rebecca landed on a carpet and avoided serious injury. However, before she could get back on her feet, Diana appeared once more. Just when Rebecca felt it was over, Sophie appeared, pointing a gun at Diana, but bullets couldn't hurt her. Sophie then turned the gun on herself. Diana terrified when she saw this. Diana turned out to be parasitic in Sophie's body. If Sophie died, Diana would also disappear. Diana had developed a parasitic relationship with Sophie during their time in the hospital. The doctors used radiation therapy to treat Diana's disease. The treatment failed, resulting in Diana's death. Diana, driven by obsession, transformed into a vengeful spirit and attached herself to Sophie. In a bid to safeguard herself and her family, Diana then turned her attention to Martin and Rebecca. Ultimately, Sophie resolved to end everything.